A 700,000-year galactic war was ended under an hour by the USS Star Destroyer. The alert sounded before I had even finished strapping into my station. Not a drill tone, not the soft chime. That meant a navigation update or a shift change. This was the deep rattling alarm that every cadet learns about in their first week of training, the one that instructors describe by saying, if you ever hear this in real space, your hands will shake, and that is perfectly normal. My hands were shaking. I am Ensign Yara Kestrel, and I had been officially assigned to the USS Star Destroyer for exactly 11 days when the universe decided to stop being polite. The Star Destroyer was not a gentle ship. She was enormous, nearly 2 km from bow to stern, built at the Luna shipyard. Over 9 years, with materials sourced from 4 different planets and the labor of 30,000 engineers. She carried 800 crew members, enough firepower to level a small moon, and the most advanced sensor array humanity had ever put into orbit. She was also, as of our departure from Earth, the flagship of a species that had been in space for just under 300 years. We were, in galactic terms, extremely new. I had been assigned to the forward sensor station on Deck 3, which meant I had a front row view of everything the ship was seeing. On most mornings, that meant asteroid fields, stellar wind readings, and the occasional binary star system that made for pretty pictures. On that particular morning, it meant something that turned my stomach completely hollow. "Kestrel, read me your contacts," said Lieutenant Owen Hale from behind me. Owen was my direct superior, a calm man of about 40 who wore his gray hair very short and had a habit of tapping his fingers on his console when he was thinking hard. "I am reading contacts, sir," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "Multiple, very multiple." "Define multiple." I looked at the number on my screen. I looked at it again because the first time I thought the system had made an error. It had not. 14,260 vessels on the port side, sir, and another 19,841 on the starboard side. The bridge went quiet in a way that was different from ordinary silence. It was the kind of quiet that happens when a large group of people all stopped breathing at the same time. "Say those numbers again, Castro," Owen said. I said them again. They did not change. Captain Aldrich Morn stepped forward from the command platform. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders, with a wide face and dark brown eyes that gave the impression of someone who had already considered every possible outcome of any situation and was not particularly worried about any of them. He came to stand beside my console and looked at my screen without touching anything. "Those are warships," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir. Configuration matches weapons platforms on both groupings. The vessels on the port side are giving off energy signatures consistent with plasma-based weapon systems. The ones on starboard are running what looks like kinetic rail technology at a scale I have never seen before." I paused. "Sir, the configuration of these fleets suggests they are facing each other, not us." Morn nodded slowly. "We jumped into two middle of a battle formation." "It appears so, sir." Navigator Paul Ashton at the helm turned around in his chair. Paul was young, younger than me even, and right now he looked like he very much wanted to be somewhere else. Captain, should I plot a jump back to the relay point? Not yet, Morn said. He stood very still. For a moment, then he said, open. Hailing frequencies on every band. No, standard first contact protocol. Every language in our archive, let them know we are here and we mean no harm. Communications Officer Diane Corbett, a sharp woman with short red hair and quick hands, worked her console without hesitating. Broadcasting, sir, all bands. For 43 seconds, nothing happened. Two enormous fleets sat on either side of us, still and vast like two mountain ranges that had noticed each other across a valley. Then simultaneously, two signals came. Back. Sir, Diane said carefully, I have two separate vessels requesting to come aboard both at the same time. Tell them both yes, Morn said. The beings who materialized in our reception bay could not have been more different from each other. The first was from the port fleet. It stood roughly at human height but had 6 limbs, a narrow, angular body covered in dark segmented plates and eyes that were completely white, set wide on a flat face. It moved with an eerie, precise stillness, like something that had learned to imitate patience without truly feeling it. We later learned its people were called the Veth Continuum. The second was from the starboard fleet. It was taller, nearly 3 m, and appeared to be made of something crystalline, with light moving slowly through its body the way light moves through deep water. Its shape shifted slightly as it breathed, or whatever it did. Instead of breathing, its people were the Oraf sovereignty. Both of them looked at each other the moment they appeared in the same room. The temperature in the reception bay seemed to drop several degrees. Then both of them looked at us, and they expression, if it could be called that, on the Veth ambassador's face was something between confusion and contempt. The Oraf ambassador's light shifted toward a cooler color. Our ship's AI identified this as a sign of alarm. You are the signal, the Veth ambassador said. Its voice came through our translator as flat and precise, like words pressed out of metal. The new signal. You are not Oraf. No, Captain Morn said pleasantly. We are human. My name is Captain Aldrich Morn, and this is the USS Star Destroyer. We come from a planet called Earth. We apologize for appearing in the middle of your formation. We did not know you were here. You did not know, the Oraf ambassador said. Its voice through the translator was slower, layered, like several voices speaking at slightly different speeds. You jumped blindly into a declared war zone. We did, Morn agreed without any sign of embarrassment. We are relatively new to this part of the galaxy. May I ask how long this war zone has existed? Both ambassadors were still watching each other. The Veth one answered without looking at Morn. The war, it said, has been continuous for 700,000 years. I had to read the translator readout twice because I was certain it had made an error. It had not. 700,000 years, Earth's oldest known human settlements were roughly 12,000 years old. Written language was perhaps 5,000 years old. The entirety of recorded human civilization could fit inside this war 700 times over, with room to spare. I watched Captain Morn's face. He did not flinch. He did not blink with surprise. He simply nodded as if someone had told him the weather was going to be cloudy tomorrow. That is a very long time, he said. I'm sorry to hear it. He paused. What was the cause? The question landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Both ambassadors turned to look at him, fully for the first time. The cause, the Veth ambassador repeated as if Morn had said something in a language it did not recognize. Yes, the original reason the war started. I find it helps to understand a conflict from its beginning. Morn said it with genuine curiosity, the same tone he used when asking the ship's engineer about a new propulsion design. Neither ambassador answered. They looked at each other again, and something passed between them that our sensors could not read. You will choose a side, the Veth ambassador said at last, or you will be treated as an enemy by both. I appreciate the offer, Morn said. Let me think about it. In the meantime, I want you both to be comfortable. Diane, can we arrange quarters for our guests? He turned and walked back toward the command platform, calm as a man heading to a morning meeting. Owen Hale fell into step beside me. Moment later, his fingers were tapping against his thigh. Castor, he said quietly. Sir, you did well at your station. Keep doing that. Sir, I said. Did he just not answer? Them. Owen looked back at the captain steady, unhurried back. No, he said, he didn't. I was not sure whether to be impressed or terrified. I decided on both. Dr. Milo Oshie was asleep when they came for him. He had managed perhaps 4 hours of rest, after spending 12 hours cataloging the stellar cartography of the region we had jumped into, a habit he had developed over 20 years of academic work, the compulsive need to record and understand before anything else. He was a trim man of 52 with round glasses he wore out of personal preference since his eyesight had been corrected years ago, and the permanent expression of someone who found everything around him genuinely interesting, even when it was frightening. The knock at his cabin door was not polite. Dr. Oshie, said the voice of Lieutenant Commander Petra Graves. Through the door, Petra was the ship's head of intelligence analysis, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had once described her job as finding the truth hiding behind things that are trying to look like other things. She did not knock softly. Get dressed. The captain needs you. Milo dressed quickly, picked up his handheld recorder out of pure instinct, and followed Petra down the corridor toward the secondary briefing room. What time is it? He asked. 3:12, she said. What does the captain want from a civilian historian at 3:12? He wants you to figure out why the two most powerful alien civilizations we have ever encountered have been trying to destroy each other for 700,000 years. Milo stopped walking for exactly one step, then caught up again. That's what I thought you said. The briefing room held Captain Morn, Owen Hale, the ship's chief science officer, Dr. Nina Radley, and 2 data terminals that were already running translation programs. On the screens were what appeared to be enormous archives, disorganized, layered, ancient in the way that things become ancient when they are very old and have been handled by many different systems over many different centuries. Dr. Morn said as Milo entered, sit down, I'll explain quickly. He did explain quickly. The war, the two fleets, the ambassadors and the guest quarters, the question that neither of them had answered. They did not answer when you asked them. The original cause, Milo said. They did not. Did they seem like they were refusing to answer or like they were trying to. Remember. Morn looked at him steadily. That, he said, is exactly the right question. Milo looked at the data terminals. Is this from their archives? We received data packages from both fleets as part of the standard first contact exchange. It is mostly navigation and species identification information, but our AI found something buried in the VETH data package. Partial historical archive, very old. Nina thinks it goes back at least 400,000 years. Dr. Nina Radley, a compact woman with a focused expression of someone perpetually solving a problem, leaned forward. The archive appears to be a backup record that survived multiple wars. Within the VETH continuum itself, it is not complete. Roughly 60% of the entries are corrupted or missing, but what remains is extraordinary. Milo was already pulling on a pair of data gloves, reaching toward the terminal. What language? 17 different ones across the period. The archive covers, Nina said. Translator is handling the later entries. Well, the earlier ones are harder. Conceptual drift is significant. Milo understood what she meant. Languages do not simply change words. Over centuries, they change the concepts behind the words. A word for war in an ancient tongue might not mean the same thing as a word for war in a modern one, because the people who created the ancient word had a different understanding of what war was, what it was for, what it meant to be in one. When a language drifts far enough, you are not translating words anymore. You are trying to reconstruct an entire way of thinking about the world. 700,000 years was not drift, it was an entirely different ocean. He worked, the rest of the room watched the screens and made notes, and occasionally brought him coffee, which he drank without tasting. The early records were fragmentary. They spoke of a territory, a system, a place of significance. The significance was not military in the earliest entries. It appeared to be cultural, perhaps spiritual, a site that held meaning for both the Veth and the Orath, at a time when both civilizations were far younger and far less powerful. There was a word that appeared repeatedly in the earliest Veth records, a word the translator initially rendered as home beyond home, which over several attempts it refined to something closer to sacred reach. There was a moon, a single unremarkable moon orbiting an unremarkable gas giant, in a system that did not even have a name in the current star charts because it was not considered worth naming. The moon appeared in hundreds of early records. Both civilizations had names for it, both considered it meaningful. And then, approximately 620,000 years ago, the moon vanished from the records entirely, not because the war destroyed it, not because either side claimed it. Milo cross-referenced the stellar cartography archives, had the ship's AI run a simulation of the system as it would have appeared based on the available data, and found the answer: a geological survey fragment so old that the file format had to be reconstructed 3 times before it was readable. The moon had been struck by a large asteroid roughly 620,000 years ago. The impact had been catastrophic. The moon had broken apart over the following centuries, its pieces slowly absorbed by the gravity of the gas giant or scattered across the system as debris. The moon was gone, had been gone for more than half the length of the war itself. Milo sat very still for a long time. Nina, he said. Yes. Does the Orth data package have anything about this system? Anything at all? Nina checked. She came back 3 minutes later looking slightly pale. There is a reference in the Orth archive, she said. It is listed under a category our translator is rendering as places of mourning. The entry is brief. It says, roughly, that the sacred reach was lost to the enemy in the early period of the conflict. Lost to the enemy, Milo said quietly. Yes, but they did not lose it to the enemy. The enemy did not take it. The enemy did not destroy it. A rock hit it. A rock that was not aimed by anyone, fired by no one, intended by nothing. A random piece of debris in the cold dark hit that moon and broke it apart, and neither civilization found out, or if they found out, they did not believe it. Or if they believed it, they could not stop what had already started, and so the war continued. The room was very quiet. 620,000 years, Milo continued, and he could hear his own voice going flat with something between awe and despair. The original cause of this war has been sitting at the bottom of a debris field, around a gas giant that neither fleet has visited in generations, and they are still fighting over something that no longer exists. He took off his data gloves. He set them on the table. The war has a reason, he said, but the reason is gone. The war is just the war now. It runs on itself. He thought about the economics of it. 700,000 years of conflict meant that every aspect of both civilizations had formed around the existence of that conflict. Their industries, their government structures, their social hierarchies, their religions, their art, their languages, all of it shaped by the fact of perpetual war. Peace was not just an unfamiliar concept. To them, peace was structurally impossible to imagine, because everything that supported their existence was built on the assumption that the war would continue. To end the war was to end themselves as they understood themselves. And yet, Milo stood up. He looked at Captain Morn. You need to tell them, he said. I know, Morn said. I need to know. How? Not privately, not diplomatically, not in a quiet room with 2 ambassadors who will filter it through 700,000 years of institutional memory and find a way to dismiss it. Milo thought about it for a moment. You need to tell everyone, both fleets at the same time, in public. Morn looked at him steadily. That is an extraordinary suggestion. Captain, I have spent 20 years studying the way civilizations justify their worst decisions. The only thing that cuts through that justification is shared, undeniable public embarrassment. You cannot negotiate privately with something that has been true for longer than human civilization has existed. You can only hold it up to the light and let everyone see it at the same time. Morn was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to Owen Hale. Get me a tactical overlay of both fleets, he said. I want to know the exact moment when the most ships from both sides are aligned on our signal. I want everyone watching when we do this. He turned back to Milo. Write me the clearest, simplest version of what you found. No academic language, no hedging, just the truth, short enough to fit in a broadcast. Milo nodded. He picked his data gloves back up. Captain, he said, what if they fire on us anyway? Morn considered this with the same calm. He brought to everything. Then our shields will have to be very good, he said. Are they? Morn almost smiled. We built them, knowing we were going out into an unknown galaxy, so yes, they are very good. He left the room. Milo sat back down, opened a new document on his terminal, and began to write the most important paragraph in human history. Outside, across the dark between the stars, 34,000 warships waited for a war that had outlived its reason by more than 500,000 years. He wrote fast. I want to be honest about what happened in those 58 minutes because I have noticed that the accounts being written by other people tend to make it sound more organized than it was. They talk about it as though the captain had a clear plan from the first second, as though every move was calculated and nothing went sideways. That is not what I experienced from the tactical station. My name is Commander Sierra Vance. I have been the tactical officer of the U.S. Star Destroyer since her commissioning, and if you want to know the truth, those were the longest, most alarming 58 minutes of my professional life. I spent a significant portion of them yelling. The plan, such as it was, had 3 phases. The captain explained it to me at 500 hours while I stood in his ready room, holding a mug of cold coffee and trying to keep my face neutral. Phase 1, position the Star Destroyer directly between both fleets and activate the full electromagnetic disruption array to jam their weapon systems. Phase 2, broadcast Dr. Oja's findings on every available frequency, translated into every language in our archive with full visual data from the stellar cartography records. Phase 3, hold position and wait. Hold position and wait, I repeated. Yes, the captain said. While we are between 34,000 warships. That is correct. Sir, our disruption array has never been tested at full capacity outside of the lunar facility simulations. There is a first time for everything. The simulations assumed a maximum of 400 simultaneous hostile vessels. We have 34,000. The math works out, Nina confirmed it an hour ago. I looked at him. Captain, the math may work out in theory, but if even a fraction of those vessels has shielding that compensates for our disruption field, we will have thousands of active weapons pointed at us with no cover. I know, Morn said. And you want to proceed anyway? Yes. I finished my cold coffee. Then I need 40 minutes to run a full weapons diagnostic and pre-charge our shield array to maximum. You have 35 go. Those 35 minutes were the second most alarming stretch of time in the whole affair. My team worked without stopping. We ran every system check available, preloaded every countermeasure we had, and I personally reviewed the shield frequency rotation protocol 3 times. Paul Ashton at navigation plotted the exact position we needed, the precise geometric center of the corridor between both fleets, close enough to be visible to every vessel on both sides, far enough from either battle line to give us some maneuvering space. At 05:37 we moved. The Star Destroyer came to a stop, exactly where Paul had plotted her. On my screen I could see the sensor returns from both fleets, tens of thousands of ships, and I watched their weapons ports. Every ship on both sides had active weapon signatures. They were not pointed at us yet, they were pointed at each other, but those signatures could rotate in seconds. Morn's voice was steady on the bridge. Disruption array, full activation. Our chief engineer, Gavin Price, a big, red-haired man who loved the ship more than most people love anything, hit the command from engineering. The Star Destroyer shuddered slightly as the array came online at full power, the way a large vehicle shudders when a powerful engine engages. For 3 seconds, nothing happened on my screen. Then the weapon signatures on both fleets flickered, dimmed, several went dark entirely, others held but at reduced intensity. Disruption is holding across approximately 89% of both fleets, my tactical officer Cass Doran called out. Cass was steady under pressure, which is the most valuable thing a tactical sub officer can be. 11% of vessels showing partial resistance to the field. 11% of 34,000 was still 3,700 ships with active weapons. I noted this, but did not say it aloud, because there was nothing to be done about it. Broadcast Morn said. Diane Corbett opened the channel. Dr. OC's voice went out across 34,000 ships, accompanied by the visual record. He had assembled the star charts, the geological survey, the debris field, the asteroid impact data, the timeline. All of it clear and simple and sourced in 47 languages simultaneously. He spoke for 11 minutes and 20 seconds. I watched my screen during those 11 minutes. I watched for the weapon signatures to rotate toward us. I watched the disruption field readings. I watched our shield levels. I probably blinked 12 times total. At minute 14, the first vessel on the starboard side, the Orth fleet, fired. It was a single ship, and the shot was not a full-power weapon discharge. It was more like a test. The beam hit our port shield facing, and the shield absorbed it without any issue. I noted the impact, logged it, and did not react. Then more fired, not all of them, but within the next 60 seconds we were receiving fire from approximately 400 Orth vessels and roughly 280 Veth vessels on the other side. Our shields at maximum pre-charge were holding. The disruption field was still suppressing the majority of both fleets, but the impacts were adding up. Shield integrity at 74%, Cass said. Her voice was still steady. I made a mental note to recommend her for promotion if we survived. Structural stress on the port bow section increasing, came Gavin's voice. From engineering, we have a thermal overload in conduit network 7. I am rerouting. Can you hold it, Gavin? Morn asked. I can hold it, Gavin said. He paused. I am not entirely happy about it, sir. Noted. Shield integrity at 68%, Cass again. I turned to the captain. Sir, at this rate we have approximately 16 minutes before our shields fail. I said it quietly close to him, not over. The general calm. He looked at me. Do you trust Nina's math? On the disruption field, yes. Then trust it. The fleets cannot sustain coordinated fire against us while the disruption field is active. They are firing independently. That snorts is the difference between being hit by a storm and being hit by an army. I turned back to my station. He was right. Technically, the shots we were absorbing were uncoordinated, coming from individual vessels making individual decisions. A coordinated volley from even a fraction of those fleets would have ended us in seconds. The disruption field was preventing coordination, but it was not preventing individuals from choosing to fire, and enough individuals were making that choice to put real pressure on us. Shield integrity at 61%. And then at minute 44, something changed. It was the Veth fleet that changed it. First, not the ambassadors, not a command decision from the flagship. It was the ships themselves, individual captains presumably watching the broadcast, presumably looking at the debris field data, presumably doing the same arithmetic that Dr. Oaths had done. In the briefing room began to stand down, their weapon signatures dropped. One ship, then three, then a cluster of 30, then hundreds, the Veth fire on our shields dropped sharply. I heard it before I saw it because the sound of our shield generators changed tone when the pressure reduced. A lower pitch, a quieter hum. Veth weapon signatures dropping across the board, Cass said, and her voice finally had something in it other than professional steadiness, something that sounded almost like wonder. 40%. Reduction 60%, 80. The Orth fleet kept firing for another 17 minutes, 17 minutes of diminishing Veth fire and sustained Orth impacts. And I want to tell you that those were 17 calm and dignified minutes, but they were not. Gavin was rerouting power from non-essential systems to shields. We had 7 separate hull stress alerts that required immediate structural response from the damage control teams. Owen Hale had a burn on his left arm from a console overload that he did not mention until hours later. I may have said several things to the captain that I will not repeat in this account. The captain drank tea. I am not inventing this. He had a cup of tea brought to him from the galley at minute 31, and he drank it during the Orth bombardment with the calm of someone sitting in a garden. At minute 59, the Orth fire stopped. 1 second there were impacts, the next second there were none. The silence was so sudden that several bridge crew members physically startled. All weapon signatures across both fleets, Cass said slowly, as though she could not quite believe the words she was reading, have gone dark. I ran the check myself. She was right. Morn set down his tea. Diane, he said, send a message to both ambassadors. Tell them I am available to meet when they are ready. He paused. Also tell them we have 7 fires to put out first, so perhaps 30 minutes. Diane sent the message, then she turned in her chair and looked at the captain with an expression that I suspect matched my own, which was the expression of someone who has just survived something that probably should not have been survivable and does not quite know what to do with that fact. Sir, she said. Yes. You knew they would stop. Morn was quiet for a moment. I knew they might stop, he said. There is a difference. I also knew that if they did not stop, our shields would fail, and then we would have a very different problem. Were you worried? He considered it. I was focused, he said. He stood up from the command chair. Let me go see about these fires. And someone wake Dr. Asai. He deserves to know it worked. He walked off the bridge. I sat in my chair for a long moment, listening to the ship settle around me, the creak and shift of stressed metal, the sound of damage control teams moving through the corridors, the quiet beeping of systems returning to normal operation. At minute 59, 2 ancient civilizations had stopped fighting for the first time in 700,000 years. I made a note of the time in the tactical log, then I went to find the medical team to have my hands looked at, because apparently I had been gripping my console hard enough to leave marks. I will tell you what peace looks like. From the lower decks, it does not look the way you might expect. I had expected relief. I had expected celebration, maybe, the kind that happens at the end of things that have been very hard. What I found in the hours after the guns went silent on both sides was something quieter and stranger than that. Something that felt less like victory and more like the moment after a very loud noise, when everything is so quiet that the quiet itself feels wrong. My name is Yara Kestrel, and I am still an ensign. I mention that because everything I am about to describe I saw from the perspective of someone who was mostly in the way of more important people and trying very hard not to show it. The first meeting between the captain and both ambassadors lasted 4 hours and 12 minutes. I was not in the room. I was stationed outside it, which meant I heard nothing except at one point a sound from inside that I can only describe as a long resonant tone, the kind of crystal bowl makes when you run a finger along the rim, which I later learned was the auric expression of extreme distress. It happened twice. What I learned afterward came from Dr. Asai, who gave me a summary with the generosity of a man who understands that junior crew members are also people. The ambassadors had watched the broadcast, they had seen the data, they had both known on some level that the specific piece of territory the war had originally been about was gone, because both civilizations had visited the system at various points over the centuries and found nothing there. But knowing something in practice and being forced to confront it formally, publicly, in front of every ship in both fleets simultaneously were entirely different things. The Veth ambassador, Dr. Asai, told me, leaning against the corridor wall with his hands in his pockets and his glasses slightly crooked, had a phrase that kept coming up in the meeting. Our translator was rendering it as the obligation of the wound. What it seems to mean essentially is that when a civilization has sacrificed enough for something, the sacrifice itself becomes a reason to continue. You keep going, not because the goal still makes sense, but because stopping would mean that everything already given was given for nothing. But it was given for nothing, I said. Yes, he said, that is rather the problem. The days that followed were some of the strangest of my life, and I had already had a very strange week. The two fleets did not immediately depart. They could not simply turn around and go home, because going home meant returning to civilizations that had been structured around a war that no longer existed, and that was not a simple logistical problem. That was an identity problem, a philosophical problem, an economic problem. Captain Morn convened what he called the Advisory Assembly, which was essentially every specialist on the ship whose expertise might be relevant to rebuilding two civilizations from the ground up. Historians, economists, engineers, psychologists, communication specialists. Dr. Asai was at the center of it, looking the most awake I had ever seen him, despite having slept approximately 6 hours in the previous 3 days. I sat in on 2 of those sessions because Lieutenant Hale sent me in with documents and I was not told to leave. The discussions were extraordinary. How do you tell a civilization that has built its entire production infrastructure around war that it needs to find something else to make? How do you reframe a religion that has incorporated the enemy as the embodiment of everything sacred to oppose? How do you reach a generation of soldiers who have never known anything except the purpose the war gave them? The answers were not clean, they were not elegant, they were practical, imperfect, and full of compromise. I listened to Dr. Oz argue for patience, and Dr. Radley argue for speed, and the captain sit between them and find the path through. On the fifth day, a section of the Orith fleet that had remained at the far edge of the formation began to move, not toward home, toward us. The alert came through at approximately 2:00 in the morning, and I was on the secondary watch at my sensor station, which meant I was the one who first read it. Contact alert, I said. 23 Orith vessels breaking from the main formation, moving toward us, increasing speed. Owen Hale was the watch commander. He was at my side in seconds. Weapon status charging, I said. The words sat in my chest like something cold. Sir, they are charging weapons. Sound the alert, get the captain. What followed happened very fast. The 23 vessels were not large by Orith standards, but they were warships, and warships moving at speed toward a ship that had just taken substantial shield damage and is still undergoing repairs is not a comfortable situation. Morn reached the bridge in 90 seconds, still pulling on his uniform jacket. Star Destroyer shields were at 62% still, recovering from the earlier engagement. Talk to me, Kestrel, he said. 23 vessels confirmed Orith. Configuration, weapons hot, closing at battle speed, at current velocity. Weapons range in approximately 4 minutes. Is the main Orith fleet moving? No, sir, the main fleet is stationary. These 23 broke from the rear of the formation. A splinter group, Morn said. Yes, sir. He looked at the screen for a moment. Open a channel to the Orith. Ambassador. The ambassador responded immediately. This told us something because it meant the ambassador was awake and watching. The light moving through its crystalline body was rapid and chaotic, colors shifting in ways the sensor translation system had not yet fully mapped. Captain, it said, and even through the translator, the weight in that word was clear. We are aware of the situation. The vessels moving toward you represent a faction that has rejected the ceasefire terms. They believe that ending the war is a betrayal of those who gave their lives in its prosecution. Can you stop them? Morn asked. We are attempting to do so, but the faction commander has cut communications with the fleet command. Then I need to ask you to clear a firing line, Morn said, because I am not willing to let them close to weapons range. The ambassador's light pulsed. If you fire on Orith vessels, the ceasefire is in danger. If I do not, Morn said calmly, those vessels will fire on us, and the ceasefire is also in danger. I would rather the distinction be clearly placed on the faction that is breaking the ceasefire, not on us for defending ourselves. He paused. Ambassador, I need you to make a public declaration right now that those 23 vessels are acting in violation of Orith ceasefire authorization. I need it on the same broadcast channel we used before, and I need it in the next 3 minutes. There was a pause of approximately 40 seconds. Then the ambassador said, agreed. The declaration went out. The 23 vessels kept coming. 2 minutes to weapons range, I said. Kestrel Morn said, I want a targeting solution on the lead vessel's propulsion system only. I want to stop them, not destroy them. I ran the calculation. The Orth ship design had its primary drive at the rear of the vessel, a large distinctive structure that our records described in reasonable detail. A precise hit there would disable forward momentum without breaching the hull or causing crew casualties. It was a difficult shot at this range and angle, but the Star Destroyer's weapon system was built to precision specifications. Solution ready, sir. Good. One more thing. He turned to Diane. Get me a shipwide channel. She opened it. He spoke to the whole crew. This is the captain. We are about to fire in defense of this ship and of the ceasefire that 800 of us helped make possible 5 days ago. Do your jobs take care of each other? He turned back to me. Fire when they cross into weapons range. They crossed the line at 1 minute and 43 seconds. I fired. The shot was clean. The lead vessel's drive section lit up and went dark, and the ship began to drift, its forward momentum carrying it on a slow arc that would take it well clear of us. I immediately retargeted the second vessel, but I did not need to fire a second time. The Orth main fleet moved, not toward us, toward the 23 ships. Dozens of vessels interposed themselves between the faction ships and the Star Destroyer, the faction commander facing both the flagship of their own fleet and a human warship that had just demonstrated surgical accuracy, stood down. It was over in minutes. What happened next was, in some ways, more significant than anything that had occurred during the 58 minutes between the fleets. The Orth High Council convened a public session, broadcast across both fleets and shared with us. They announced that the faction leadership had violated the ceasefire and had brought dishonor to the Orth sovereignty. They announced consequences that our translator had difficulty rendering into human equivalents, but the general effect was clear. The council then did something that our records indicated had never happened in the entire history of Orth civilization. They apologized publicly to us. Dr. Oz came to stand beside me at my station when the broadcast ended. His glasses were crooked again. He looked as though he was not entirely sure what expression was appropriate. Well, he said quietly. Yes, I said. I did not expect that part. Neither did I. We stood there for a moment, watching the broadcast end. Captain Morn is going to need more tea, I said. Dr. Oz, I laughed, a short and genuine laugh. Yes, he said, he. Much is. The formal peace accord was signed 2 days later in the Star Destroyer's main conference room. Both ambassadors were present. Captain Morn was present. Dr. Ose was present because Morn said the accord would not have existed without him, and he should be in the room when it was made real. I stood at the back of the room as part of the security detail. I watched both ambassadors place whatever they used instead of hands on the document our legal team had prepared. The Veth ambassador pressed 2 of its limbs to the page. The Orth ambassador's light shifted when it touched the document, moving through long slow spectrum of colors that the sensor system could not name. Nobody smiled. The Veth ambassador's expression, as far as we could read it, suggested something like grief. The Orth ambassador's light settled into a color our system had begun to associate with exhaustion. Morn looked at me after it was signed. I was the nearest person to him at that moment, the closest junior officer. The room, and he spoke to me rather than to the assembled senior staff, which I thought was probably deliberate. Castro, he said. Sir, nobody in this room is happy right now. No, sir. Good, he said. That means it was real peace that makes everyone happy is a performance. Peace that makes everyone uncomfortable is an agreement. I thought about that for a long time. Afterward, I am going to write this the way I write everything, as clearly and directly as I can, because I think the moment deserves honesty more than it deserves style. My name is Dr. Milo Ose. I am a historian. I study the way civilizations behave over time. I have spent most of my adult life in libraries and archives and quiet rooms reading about things that happened to other people a long time ago. I never expected to be part of anything that would itself become history. Nobody in my profession really does. You spend your years reconstructing the past, and somewhere in the back of your mind you assume that the significant events are behind you, that the great turning points have already turned. I was wrong about that. The peace accord was signed on a Tuesday. That is not a significant detail in any cosmic sense, but I find myself wanting to record it because it grounds the event in the ordinary flow of time. A Tuesday, the ship's galley served its regular breakfast rotation. Someone in engineering had a birthday. The universe did not stop to acknowledge that 34,000 warships were standing down from a conflict that had been running since before our ancestors had climbed out of the trees. My report on the Kestrel incident, which is what official documentation began to call it, though I am told that Ensign Kestrel herself finds this slightly embarrassing, ran to approximately 40,000 words in its full form. The summary that was distributed to Earth's government and the global scientific community was considerably shorter. The version that went out on the general public information network was shorter still, but the core of it was simple enough to say in a few sentences, and I practiced saying it a great deal in the days after the accord was signed because people kept asking me to explain it. Here is what happened. Two civilizations went to war over a piece of territory. The territory was destroyed by a natural event before either side could claim it. Neither civilization acknowledged this publicly, or perhaps neither fully understood it. The war continued on its own momentum. It continued for so long that the original cause was forgotten in practice, though not in a way either side would ever admit. The war became its own justification. 700,000 years of sacrifice became the reason to keep sacrificing. A human ship appeared in the middle of this, asked a simple question and found a simple answer. Then a human captain chose to say the answer very loudly in front of everyone, all at once without asking permission. And somehow that was enough. I say somehow, but I have spent a great deal of time since then thinking about why it worked, and I have a theory, not a historical theory, something more personal. Both the Veth and the Orth had been asked over the centuries to end the war. I found references in both archives to diplomatic efforts to cease fire, proposals to internal factions that pushed for peace. Every one of them failed. They failed because they were framed as choices. Someone had to choose to be the one who stopped, and choosing To stop in the context of 700,000 years of conflict meant choosing to suggest that everything given up to that point had been given for nothing. No civilization can make that choice willingly. The identity cost is too high. What Morn did was remove the choice. He did not ask them to agree that the war was pointless. He told them publicly and simultaneously that the cause was gone. Not wrong, not unjust, not something to be ashamed of, just gone. He shifted it from a question of decision to a question of fact. The war did not end because either side decided to end it. It ended because both sides were forced to see at the same moment in front of each other that there was nothing left for the war to be about. The shame of it, I think, is what made the difference. Not shame in the sense of humiliation, but something more specific, the shame of realizing that two civilizations had looked at the same absence and each invented a different story to fill it. The Veth believed the Orath had taken the sacred reach. The Orath believed the Veth had destroyed it. Both stories were wrong. The truth was that the universe had simply, impersonally, without malice or meaning, removed the thing they were fighting over, and they had both been too deep in the war to look up and notice. There is a particular kind of moment I have found in my years of historical study when a civilization confronts the gap between what it believes to be true and what is actually true. Sometimes the confrontation produces anger, sometimes it produces denial, occasionally in the right circumstances it produces something that resembles relief, a long breath after a long time spent not breathing fully. I think that is what happened in that conference room, exhausted relief. In the weeks that followed the accord, my role shifted from researcher to something I did not have a professional title for, advisor perhaps, though that sounds too formal. I was asked, along with a growing team of specialists from the Star Destroyer's crew, to help both civilizations begin the practical work of dismantling 700,000 years of war. Infrastructure, not the physical infrastructure, though that was enormous, the conceptual infrastructure, the stories they told themselves, the purposes they had built into their institutions, their education systems, their ceremonies and traditions. It was the hardest work I have ever done, harder than the research, because research has right answers. This did not. There were no right answers. There were only less wrong ones, and finding them required listening for much longer than it required talking. I learned things in those weeks that I had never encountered in any archive. I learned that the Veth had a ceremony observed every generation in which the youngest members of each community were told the history of the war, not a political history, an emotional history. They were told what it felt like to live with loss so they would understand what they were fighting to prevent. It was intended to keep the purpose of the war alive, but over 3,000 generations it had become something else, something closer to a ritual of grief that had lost its connection to anything specific, children learning to mourn something they could not name. I learned that the Orath had a tradition of counting their losses differently from most civilizations. They did not count the dead as casualties. They counted them as having joined what they called the long advance, the idea that those who fell in the war were not gone, but were pressing forward on some level of existence the living could not perceive. It was a beautiful concept. It had also made it very difficult to stop. because stopping would mean that the long advance was not advancing toward anything, that the direction had been wrong from the beginning. I learned that both civilizations had developed independently and without awareness of each other, a form of music that was played at significant moments of transition. Not the same music, not the same instruments, not even the same basic structure, but something in the emotional purpose was recognizable across the difference. Both used music to mark the moments when something ended and something began. When I brought this to the attention of both delegations, suggesting it as a possible shared language for the transition ahead, both ambassadors were silent for a long time. Then the Orith ambassador's light shifted through color I had not seen before, a deep warm amber that our sensor system had no previous record of, and the Veth ambassador, for the first time in any of our recorded interactions, made a sound that was not words, a low, resonant tone that lasted several seconds. Dr. Radley, sitting beside me, pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment. She had a professional discipline that generally prevented her from showing emotion in formal settings. She maintained it, but I noted the effort. The Galactic Accord seal was presented to us approximately 3 weeks after the Accord was signed, in a ceremony that both delegations designed jointly, which was itself considered significant. It was the first thing they had designed together. It was a small object, a sphere of material that neither we nor our instruments could fully identify, that shifted color slowly in a pattern that both civilizations' historians identified as representing the concept of change without loss, keeping what mattered while becoming something different. Captain Moore accepted it with the quiet gravity that he brought to everything. He held it for a moment, then placed it on the command center of the bridge, where it stayed for the remainder of our posting. He submitted the requisition for repairs. The same afternoon, the list was substantial: 7 hull sections with stress fractures requiring replacement, 14 conduit networks that needed full rewiring, the shield array needed new emitter cores on the port and starboard facing, the electromagnetic disruption array needed recalibration after the sustained output during the 58 minutes. Total repair time, the engineers estimated, was approximately 6 months. Morn submitted the requisition with a covering note that was, by his standards, quite long. It said roughly that the Star Destroyer had performed beyond all design specifications in circumstances that had not been modeled during construction, that the crew had performed beyond all reasonable professional expectations, and that if whoever read this report wanted to argue about repair costs, they were welcome to explain to the commanders of 34,000 warships why Earth was not worth the investment. Nobody argued about the repair costs. There is a particular view from the observation deck of the Star Destroyer that I had visited a few times during our posting, usually late at night when the ship was quiet and I needed somewhere to think. It was not the most scenic view on board. The main observation lounge had better windows and more comfortable chairs, but the secondary observation point on deck 7 had something the main lounge did not, which was a direct line of sight in the direction of the debris field. The debris field where the moon used to be. 3 weeks after the Accord was signed, I was on the observation deck late in The evening when Ensign Kestrel came in. She was off duty, still in her uniform, but without the formal bearing she wore. On the bridge, and she stood beside me, at the window without saying anything. For a while. "You all right?" she asked eventually. "I am trying to figure out what I feel," I said. "I keep expecting to arrive at a clear answer, and I keep not arriving." "Is it pride?" she asked. "Or is it something like terror?" I looked at her. "That is a very precise question. Someone said something to me about that." She shrugged slightly. "When it ended, when the accord was signed, I kept waiting to feel like we had done something good, and I do feel that, but I also feel like we just reached into something much older and larger than us, and we moved it, and now we have to live with the fact that we are the kind of species that does that. And other things in the galaxy now know it too." I considered this carefully because she had named something that I had been circling without quite reaching. "We went out here to explore," I said. "That was the mission, discovery, knowledge, understanding." "But that is not what we did," she said. "No," I agreed, "it is not." We were both quiet for a moment. "What did we do?" she asked, not confrontationally, genuinely. I thought about the Veth children, learning to mourn something they could not name. I thought about the Orith tradition of the long advance, the fallen pressing forward into a direction that turned out to be wrong. I thought about two civilizations that had made something so enormous out of something so lost, and about a captain who had put down his tea and done the one thing that nobody else in the galaxy had thought to do, which was simply hold the truth up and refuse to put it down. "I think," I said slowly, "we found out what we are for." Yara looked at me. "Not exploration," I said, "not conquest, not expansion, something harder to name than any of those things. We find the wrong things that have been going on for so long that everything else has grown up around them, and we cannot stop seeing them because we are too young to have learned not to look, and we are too stubborn to pretend they are not there." "That sounds like a very uncomfortable purpose," she said. "It is," I said. "I expect it will become more uncomfortable before it becomes easier." I did not tell her then about the 11 other wars. I had read the preliminary assessment, the morning briefing, the quietly alarming document that the Galactic archive had transmitted to us 2 days after the accord was signed. 11 other long-running conflicts in the documented galaxy, all showing the same structural signatures as the Vetherith War, long enough to have outlived their original causes, deep enough to have become part of the identity of every civilization involved. The archive had transmitted the assessment with a note that the human presence was noted and that there were questions to be discussed about the role our species might play in galactic affairs going forward. Captain Morn had read the assessment at breakfast and said nothing for a long time. Then he had asked Gavin Price how long the repairs would actually take if the engineering team worked extended shifts. I looked at the debris field, or the place where it would be, behind the dark, between the stars, invisible from here, but present nonetheless. 700,000 years, a moon, a rock that nobody aimed. We had ended the war, but we had not fixed the thing underneath the war. The habit that makes civilizations hold on to wounds past the point of sense. Difficulty of admitting that something you built your whole life around was built on a foundation that dissolved a long time ago. That was not a problem that could be solved in 58 minutes. That was not a problem that could be solved at all. Probably, it could only be named and shown, and held up to the light over and over again, in the hope that something would change, which I supposed was work. I had spent my career studying the past, because I believed the past mattered, because I believed that understanding how things had gone wrong before was the closest humanity had to map for the future. I had not expected to find myself in the middle of something that would one day be in the archive itself. I had not expected to be, in some small way, part of what future historians would read when they were trying to understand how an era began. But here we were, and the future was already arriving, one careful, imperfect step at a time. Yara was still at the window. Her reflection in the glass looked young, which she was. She also looked in that moment like someone who had taken the measure of something and found that she did not flinch. "I should get some sleep," she said. "Yes," I said, "so should I." Neither of us moved for another few minutes. Outside, where the two great fleets had been, there were only stars. The ships had begun to disperse over the preceding days, the long, slow dissolution of a formation that had held its shape for longer than human civilization had existed. They were going home, all of them, to worlds that would need to learn how to be something other than what they had always been. It was not a clean ending. It was not a triumphant one. It was the beginning of something slow and uncertain and necessary. But it had begun. My journal entry for that evening was brief. I had spent 40,000 words writing the official report. I did not have many left. I wrote, "We came out here to explore. Apparently, the universe had a different job in mind." I closed the journal. I looked at the stars for a while longer. Then I went to sleep.